Hi, everybody. Welcome to Liberation Lectionary. My name is Jamie Edwards Acton. I am an Episcopal priest out here in Los Angeles, and I'm joined as always by.
Hey friends, Francisco Garcia, also an Episcopal priest here in Nashville.
And today we are going to take a look at the gospel for this coming Sunday, which is the ninth Sunday after Pentecost, and in the year A, or proper 13 for year A. And here on Liberation Lectionary, always what we're trying to do is whatever reading passage we're going to take up, where we're looking for the good news of liberation with a particular lens, particular perspective on this passage. And we hope that in hearing this, it might give you some things to chew on as you craft your own sermons, as you craft your own kind of speeches out at your protests, as you think about what you're going to talk about over dinner with your family. So let's get started. Today we're going to look at Matthew 14, verses 13 through 21. And this should be a familiar passage. And Francisco's going to read this passage for us, and then we're just going to start riffing.
Right. So here we go. Jesus withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ. All right. Well, I like this passage.
You heard this one before?
I think we've heard this one before a few million times. I appreciated how you read it too, Francisco. Very dramatic. I like that, man. I felt like I was there. Well, we're just going to, usually what we do is we just kind of go through the reading, sometimes in order, sometimes in not, and we're just going to ping pong back and forth and see what comes up. Let me get the ball started, and what stands out for me is just this first few lines. Now, when Jesus heard this, what is this thing that Jesus heard? I think that's an important piece of context for any sermon or speech or conversation. What Jesus just heard was the news about John the Baptist getting, offing with his head. And this was not just any kind of murder. This was a murder in the context of kind of the rich and powerful, and just having this prophet, in chained, and incarcerated in their midst, and just at their pleasure, right? Just at the pleasure of Herod's daughter and mother, or wife rather, and just to murder this prophet. And so just the whole, this is not all that unusual even today, right? And so, but the whole scene, I think, or hearing about it, and just Jesus's love and appreciation and respect for John the Baptist, his first reaction is he needs some time alone, right? And so he needs some time alone, and he needs to know, really kind of just he needs to kind of deal with this, I think, and then how is he going to respond to this? How is he going to respond to this? And then I think that's what leads us into this scene here.
Right. And so it's interesting to for those of you who are preaching this Sunday, just notice the differences. And if you are in the Episcopal tradition and you follow the lectionary page, that little line that Jamie began with actually, for some reason, is not here. But if you go back to the NRSV, it starts with this. Now, when Jesus heard this about John the Baptist, and here we have Jesus withdrew, it goes straight to withdrawing to the boat. It's important to know what happened just before, because this is the context in which Jesus is operating. It's a dangerous time where someone who was something of a mentor to Jesus, right? We know John the Baptist paved the way for the ministry of Jesus. And so Jesus is preaching and doing the work of healing and calling forth God's liberation in a dangerous time and in a dangerous setting. And here immediately goes to his next act of public ministry. And that's what we have here with the feeding of the 5,000 plus, right? So what calls my attention here is, where it says that he had compassion for them and cured their sick. And if you go to the original sort of description of this compassion, it's an active word, a deep gut level feeling where it is almost as if God's solidarity wells up within Jesus and compels him to act and to call the disciples to act in the face of deep need. People needed healing. People were hungry, but not just hungry, but actually sick, and something needed to happen.
Yeah. And yeah, compassion, that word, suffering with, right? As if you were with them, right? Feeling what they're experiencing. And again, I just want to call a contrast between these two crowds, right? We have the crowd of the rich and famous and powerful who just for sport, they kill this this powerful prophet of the poor and the marginalized. And then, and Jesus, so enraged and so distraught, has to draw away, right? Just to kind of, probably regather himself. And then you have this image where he sees this other crowd, right, where people are suffering and people are they need curing and they need help and they're hungry, and he feels compassion. So it's just these two different crowds and these two different feelings that Jesus has of these people. So I and then so what I see then too is that he sees compassion. Evening's coming. They, and so the disciples start to kind of get nervous and panic a little bit because they're in a deserted place. That's such a great word because it's so contemporary when we talk about food deserts, right? And here you have this deserted place, and it makes me think we talked a few episodes back about Ron Finley, right, and the gangster gardener, and trying to turn a food desert in South Los Angeles into a food forest. And he doesn't go looking for resources from the powerful and from the rich and famous. He's just doing it himself. He knows that the community itself has what they need to make this transformation happen. And so even though the disciples panic and they get nervous and they tell Jesus to send the crowd away because they feel like they don't have enough, right? This is a feeling we always have, especially those who are not the rich and powerful, that we feel like we don't have enough to make a difference. But Jesus sees it differently here.
All we have here is a 7-Eleven. What are we going to feed the people? Slurpees?
That's right. That's right.
It draws attention to the lack of imagination, I think, too. And so God's call for justice and liberation is about a radical reimagining of what is possible, obviously ushering a new world, a new way of life, a new way of thinking, acting, living, being. And Jesus is bringing all of that to bear in this passage. He's like, no, they don't got to go. They can stay right here. We have what we need. We are what we need. And we are going to collectively gather up what we have, and you'll see that there is enough.
Right. Yeah, I think the choices for the disciples seem like either Jesus sends them away or he takes care of it all by himself, right? And Jesus says, no, there's a third, there's another more important approach to, that we can take here. And I think that what Jesus does here is he tries to get the disciples to see that ultimately our problem is not that we lack the resources, right? Because you see in this where he's trying to make this paradigm shift where, the disciples say, "Hey, we only have 5 loaves and 2 fish," and Jesus is like, "Hey, we have 5 loaves and 2 fish, you
Yeah.
know, and let's build on that." And so he's saying our problem is not lack of resources. Our problem is lack of solidarity with these folks here, right? With these people that are gathered here that are struggling, that are suffering, and so we need to have that same compassion that Jesus demonstrates, and so that we can feel what they're feeling. And one of those things that we're going to feel is that if we unite, if we come together, if we show solidarity with one another, we will see that actually we have what we need in our midst. And Jesus lifts up, this 5 loaves and 2 fish as, man, that may have been enough already. If that's not enough, this is a great start. Let's see what else people have, right? I was sharing you briefly, this interpretation we heard last night of a radio drama in Spanish, and and where they saw this, and Jesus holds up the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and then it kind of inspires others to kind of come to like come clean, like with, "Hey, I actually got an extra loaf in my backpack," or here I got some olives in my pocket here, I can add that. "Hey, I have some cheese here," so it's I think it's really it's getting it's getting this crowd, it's getting the disciples and the crowd to see how much they really have, right? How much abundance actually is in their midst, especially if they show solidarity with one another, and if they unite and kind of bring everything they have together. And it makes me think of, there's a song. There's a song in the Salvadoran Mass, one of the settings, and it says when something like, "When the poor believe in the poor, then we can already start to sing liberty, freedom, right? When they believe in themselves, when they see that they have the capacity to have what they need, at least to get the ball rolling, right? Then we can already begin to sing freedom." So
That's awesome, and I think that is sort of what Jesus is doing here with the crowds, but a bit, I think, with the disciples, right, where they had this deficit understanding of their existence, of the situation. And we kind of talked about the idea of there's the practice of asset-based community development, or
right.
community, how we can usher the resources that we have, and we can identify our power, and then also see where there's a need, but we don't give away our power, right? We have a true sense of the collective capacities, even in the midst of a difficulty. And so the disciples were coming into this realization because this Jesus consciousness, this God consciousness that says, we got what we need, and we're going to do something with it, and not the way of the kingdom of the world, which the empire, which obviously created haves and have-nots. And I know we've been focusing on the gospel pretty consistently throughout our liberation lectionaries, but I'd like to lift up the Isaiah reading today, because I think it's a powerful correlation about the vision of God's abundance and the feast. Right, the first few verses, it says, it's Isaiah 55 verses 1, 2, and 3. "Thus says the Lord, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you that have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy milk and wine without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food." So in the time when when abundance was seen through food, right? The feast, come and eat. You don't have to, it doesn't cost anything. It's there for the taking. And I think that's sort of the vision of that beloved community, where everyone has a place at the table, where there's plenty to eat, and everyone has what they need to be well.
Yeah, and I love that, and it makes me think that just in general, this whole story is not a, people get so caught up in the what Jesus did, like, what happened, but really it's why this happened is the thing we should pursuing. Why is Jesus doing what he's doing in this passage? And it's just like you said, is to show this new economy, right? This new economy that, or this alternative economy, not a new one, but this alternative economy that Isaiah lifted up and others lifted up throughout history, and just to get people to embrace and live into and live under that economy, and in doing so, the abundance would be is beyond their imagination, and the kind of the story ends with this filling up the 12 baskets of leftovers, and the 12 baskets is no accidental number, but it's a symbolizes the all of God's people, right? The 12 tribes, and so all of God's people will be fed, all of God's people will be taken care of, and not just those bastards at the Herod's party, right? They think they're the only ones being taken care of, but really Jesus's attention and God's focus and God's love and concern is directed elsewhere.
And it also shows that God's economy is different than the humanly constructed economy, which we kind of now know as neoliberalism, or capitalism, of mass consumption. God's economy does not require that we as humans be productive in producing things for consumption, but that we are producing in a way that it looks towards the well-being of people and planet, right? And does
Right.
not sacrifice people and planet. And so I think it's a real challenge for us in our current systems where, you know, uh, working people are being sort of like run over by our economy,
Yeah.
and sacrificed because of this pandemic, when immigrant workers and workers of color and low income workers and people who have no option, they have to show up. They cannot
Right.
work. And we just have so much work to do. And I think these scriptures lift up the radical new possibility of what can be done.
Yeah, I love that, and then just again the contrast between the expendable thinking, right, of this first economy showed in Herod's palace, right, and that the poor are expendable, the prophet, the truth speakers are expendable if they're going to threaten our way of life, and then you have and that economy ends in death, right, and this other economy is all about bringing life out of out of nowhere, it seems, right? It comes from us, right? We have that capacity, but it feels like it comes from nowhere, because we're already buying into that other economy, and so we're trying to be coaxed into a new way of thinking and living, and I just love the contrast. So,
Awesome.
all right, man. Well, this has been another episode of Liberation Lectionary, and we're really glad you could join us. We'll be back next week, and we look forward to seeing you. So, from Los Angeles, take care.
Please like, share, and comment. Let us know what you're thinking and what you're doing with these scriptures to seek and find liberation.
Peace.